Thank you for joining us online and in person as well. This is Save Chelmsford Wildlife, and basically I just want to tell you my story of like how I got here. I just started off as a wildlife photographer, and basically, seeing some owls and stuff like that around. Eventually, I kind of got to know the owls a little bit more, kind of visit them, every single weekend, that kind of a thing. Eventually, you start to see empty holes, stuff like that. You kind of wonder where they went. Asking other photographers and stuff like that, and they were kind of like educating me a little bit more about like the rodent sites and stuff like that. So that's when I kind of get a little more concerned about um, you know where all the wildlife is going. Um, so more of that stuff, that's when I kind of did a little more research, and then obviously went to the Mass Audubon newsletter, and then pretty much I just signed up, and then I met Heather, um, and basically I looked up on the chart and said nobody was doing anything in Chelmsford, so here I am. Pretty much it. Yeah. So hopefully we will get something going on here, and then hopefully we can get these poisonous, get the poison in Chelmsford to get banned in the town to try to make a difference in our wildlife.
Thank you for coming. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was at a meeting in this room last week where people on Zoom were having trouble hearing.
They're hearing just fine, but they aren't hearing you. There's a mic here.
That's all right. I'm not.
Yeah. No.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Oh yeah, it's okay. Yeah. So it's just like my background himself. So I think I'm definitely gonna get a group. What's that? Oh, Derek Suhu. Did I not say that? I'm sorry. I'm Derek Suhu. Yeah. Yeah. So this is kind of like the first Eastern Screech owl. I took a photo of. This is after dark and stuff like that, and obviously it's kind of unique because he's got a little bedhead going on there. He had just woken up, and it was just like one of those things you kind of like fell in love with, just like the whole like wildlife itself, and then was able to see this little guy fly up the hole, and then go off into he's hunting and getting a little hungry. What do I call it? What's that? This one was in High Street, in Newburyport. Yeah. But sadly, he's no longer there. Because eventually, after I kept on visiting him, I ended up seeing this, this was his home. And it was just like an empty hole. So that's kind of when I was like, something's gonna something happened here. So, but yeah. I'd like to talk about more of like the rescue part. And I think we have Jane here from Jane Newhouse, and she has a little bit more of expertise and firsthand with the animals. So I'm gonna get that to her, and we can go on from there. There. Oops.
Oh. I don't know how these are okay. You hear me okay? Just want to turn off the light so that we can see. Oh, okay. Can you see me okay? Even with the lights off? I just shine. Excellent. Excellent. Okay, so I'm Jane Newhouse, and I'm here to talk to you today about rodenticide and working with Derek and Heather to explain to you the terrible effect it has on our wildlife. So the first thing I want to talk about is rodents, because I think a lot of people think that we're hating on rodents. So they do have a place in our ecosystem. They do help make the world a better place. So they have a place in the food chain. They aid in forest regeneration and plant biodiversity, and they help with soil aeration too. So they're not just pests, they do help the environment as well. That being said, You don't want to live with rodents in your house. It's very bad for you. They can cause a lot of issues. There are diseases that rodents can spread. So we're not advocating for people not using rodenticides and just living with rodents. You know, there's a whole slew of issues: leptospirosis, salmonella, rat bite fever. Some people have allergies to rodents. There's property damage, the chewing and gnawing. I'm sure all of us at one point or another have experienced this. The structural damage, contamination, noise and odor, damage to your food supply, and a potential impact on your pets. If you have a mouse or a rat, if they bite your pet or anything like that, it could cause issues. So we don't really want them living in our homes with us. It's not working anymore. Oh, voila. Okay. So this is what rodenticide looks like. It's what rat poison looks like. I'm sure a lot of us have seen that at some point or another. It's usually lime green, not always. And there's a first generation and a second generation. I'm not going to tell you all the names because a lot of them I can't even pronounce. But it's important for you to know that the first generation, when it came out, it was pretty deadly to the animals. A lot of people know about warfarin. Some people actually take warfarin. But warfarin being a first generation, if you were to be on it, it could help with like heart issues or concerns. You would have to have a doctor that told you exactly how much that you would be able to have. There are a slew of side effects that you have to keep in mind that you could have. If you ever were to have surgery or anything like that, you had to stop taking it. And if you couldn't take warfarin if you were pregnant, because there are so many fetal syndromes that come from warfarin. So with this being a first generation anticoagulant rodenticide, less intense to the body, but still really, really deadly. And then scientists stepped it up a notch and made second generation rodenticides. So these, no one takes these. No human takes these, okay? They're way, way worse. They actually take longer to kill the mouse or the rat. So scientists did this in hopes that they would leave the building, okay? So they wouldn't die inside the walls. So instead of working immediately like the first generations did, they don't feel sick till about 5 or 6 days later. So what that means is they'll gorge on that stuff. They'll actually eat way more than is necessary to kill them because they don't feel bad. Whereas with the first generations and other stuff, they had a stop action, which the animal started to feel bad the minute it started digesting it, so it would stop eating. So you've got mice walking around with enough poison in them to kill several mice, actually, and they're leaving the building. It's taken it days to kill them, so they're having time to leave. Can you press that button again? Sorry. Okay, so how does rat poison work? I always love to explain this because it does something very, very simple, but it causes a slew of issues. So the way that it works, it's like a domino game, which everyone's played dominoes before. It's a game I don't have patience for. But you know that if you remove one thing from a domino game, the game stops, right? It can't continue. That's just like your clotting cascade. So for your blood to clot, like 50 things have to happen. And if you remove one of those things, the cascade won't work. So what this rat poison does is it essentially removes vitamin K from the body, which is essential to the clotting process. So these animals, they're just depleted of a vitamin, essentially. And that depletion can literally make them bleed out internally. Also make it hard for them to heal from things, right? Because if you can't clot, you can't heal. So if you can't clot, you can't heal. Basically, if you right now in this room, you're actually using clotting inside where you don't see, there's little nicks or things in your veins or capillaries. If you have a bruise, your body's using clotting to heal, even if you can't see a break in your skin. But where you have animals like foxes that are dealing with mange and stuff, they're scratching and opening up their skin. And if their skin can't clot, it can't even begin to heal. Next slide, please. So the issue with that is you've got these mice that have this poison that's making them bleed out internally. And we know that second generations, these animals love to gorge on. And so what happens is they're not feeling so good. So they're acting kind of slow. They're moving slow. And if you've ever watched National Geographic and there's a lion that's trying to hunt, what's he looking for? He's looking for the weak one, right? He wants to use his minimal energy with maximum results. So they're looking for the young ones, the weak ones, the injured ones. So when you have a mouse or a rat that's not feeling so good, it's starting to die, the predators are honing right in on that. Easy catch. Next slide. And then you have this whole cascade where we have so many animals in the food chain that are meant to keep rodents down. So many different ones. We have some of our omnivores, like our skunks, raccoons, that don't feed on them mainly, but do help keep their numbers down. And then we have animals like our birds of prey, that's all they do all day long is hunt mice and rats, rodents. Some people's cats are big on catching rodents, you know? So people, when they poison mice and stuff in their home, you got to worry about. And if you have an outdoor cat, and don't get me started, but if you have an outdoor cat, you have to be concerned about this. People are poisoning these rodents, and cats that eat rodents absolutely can get poisoned. So animals bigger up the food chain, sure, that also it affects coyotes. I've been drawing blood on animals that we receive, and most of our carnivores, our animals that specifically really focus on eating mice and rats, are the ones that are affected. Weasels too. That's all they do, and they're so small, but they eat lots of mice and rats, squirrels. And I just recently treated a weasel that we had a full necropsy done on. I couldn't save it. It was found near a dumpster, and it had been exposed to rodenticide. It didn't eat the rodenticide directly. They're carnivores. So he had eaten some mice that had been poisoned. Next slide, please. We see it most, it's most deadly in our birds of prey because they weigh less, right? And that's really what a lot of them are going for specifically, is just some of our foxes and our coyotes are eating more. They'll eat mice and rats, but they're also eating, they might eat raccoons, they might eat rabbits, things like that. But our birds of prey, like our hawks and a lot of our owls, are specifically looking for mice and rats all the time. And they eat so many. That's like several in a day. They'll eat up to 2,000 in a year. So this piles up in their system, because also the first generation doesn't last as long in the body as the second generation does. The second generation persists in the tissue for at least 6 weeks. At least 6 weeks. I read that and can confirm, because what happens is when I'm treating animals for pesticide poisoning, if we're actually able to help them, when I give them vitamin K, I'll test their blood, and it'll start clotting normally again. And so I have to give them vitamin K 2 times a day, every single day. And then to make sure that it's out of their system, I'll stop giving vitamin K for a couple of days and draw their blood again. And wouldn't you know, if I try before 6 weeks, it starts to not clot again. And sometimes I've had to go 8 weeks. So it definitely persists in the tissue for a very long time, and it stays in the liver. Next slide, please. I am a mammal rehabber. Most of my experience does come from mammals, though I do triage birds of prey, especially ones found in Chelmsford or the surrounding towns. I work with the ACOs. So I have triaged a fair amount of birds. I've been dealing with rat poison, but where I have seen a lot of it is in my foxes, which is interesting because you don't hear about it a lot in foxes. I was drawing blood on all of them because they do love to eat mice and rats. And most of my mangy foxes, 4 out of 5, their blood does not clot properly. And what I'm telling you about that is it's not like a slight delay. Okay, their blood should clot in 2 to 5 minutes. It's like taking every minute longer than 5 minutes is critical. Okay, so it's significantly worse if it takes 6 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 minutes. If it takes 20 minutes, they're dead. I can't save them. I've tried. We've done everything. So when it takes them between 10 and 20 minutes, they're really, really hurting. We're really starting to see a lot of effects. The rat poison compromises their immune system. This has been proven in tests. One just coincidence, that one way that I found that it makes mange so much worse. This is a family that I was treating for mange. We got the dad and his 2 sons. They all had mange. The dad's blood clotted normally. Both of his sons were poisoned. Can't you just look at them and tell which ones were poisoned? They all were dealing with the same affliction, but the dad wasn't affected near as bad. He only needed to stay with us for a few days, and we treated him for the mange, and he was great. His sons were with us for months, okay? Now, another reason why younger foxes might get poisoned and an older one won't, dad's an efficient hunter, okay? His sons were still learning how to hunt, so they probably did a little bit more scavenging, right? So they're more likely to eat some poison rodents because they're looking for ones that are dead or harder. So I found this situation very interesting. I found their sister a week later. I could not save her. It was awful. It was awful. And I won't show pictures and I won't go into detail because it will make this all so depressing. But I can tell you that I've like literally before I die, I want to know that this stuff was outlawed. And I've said that, like, if I do anything with wildlife rehab, stopping poison would be huge. Next slide, please. So this is what we do. Every fox we get, like I was saying, will draw blood, and then I just wait. It just goes in a tube, and then we just wait to see how long it takes to clot. This is from a hawk I received from Lowell. There was a bunch of homeless men standing around a fire, and they just saw a hawk drop into a trash bin, and they called Lowell Animal Control. I drew that hawk's blood, and hawks and owls can survive longer, I've noted, than the foxes can with the blood delayed clotting. This one, his blood actually never clotted. 3 days later, I finally just got rid of it because I was like, he's definitely super poisoned. And we treated him. The problem is the vitamin K takes 2 or 3 days to actually start working. So, you know, can you imagine bleeding out internally? And I'm like, here's a Flintstone vitamin. You'll be fine, you know? But that's really the only thing we have to work with other than blood transfusions and plasma transfusions. It's very hard to do those sorts of things on a bird. So it's very serious, and it's so upsetting because we see it over and over again. Cape Ann Wildlife has worked with Save Lexington Wildlife, Save Arlington Wildlife, and they've compiled this list of all these necropsies of all these animals found in Massachusetts that died from rodenticide poisoning. Literally, a necropsy is an autopsy of an animal, okay? We've got veterinarians that are saying this animal bled out internally, clearly from opening it up. And then you've got lab results saying this poison, all second-generation rodenticides. So not just one type, too, guys. These animals are ingesting multiple types. I don't even think we have studies to show what happens when you combine different types of SGARs, what it does to the body, what's happening to these pregnant animals. Are we even finding out what's happening to their babies? Next slide, please. This was my first experience with rat poison. I didn't think I'd be dealing with it because I heard about it a lot with birds, but I was at a conference where the vet there said, you should draw blood on all of our carnivores and just test their blood. And so I did, not thinking that this was going to be an issue. He's my first one. He was 4 months old, and his blood never clotted, and he died. And that was a horrific thing to witness. This is the test. So the brodifacoum in his system at 0.4, I can't tell you how crazy high that is, those levels. So the vet did the necropsy and said definitively he bled out in his abdomen. Veterinarians will tell you that our birds of prey will bleed out peripherally. You can like part their feathers and see all the bruising all over them. Our mammals or foxes tend to bleed out abdominally because they've seen it so many times. They can tell you how each of these species presents. Next slide, please. See, I'm getting all heated now. So Laurel Series is a doctor, biologist. She studies, she has a lot of different studies. And one study she did was on mange and bobcats. And she was actually able to prove scientifically that bobcats that were exposed to rat poison their immune systems were compromised and they were way more likely to come down with mange. She actually found that if tested positive at all, even if their blood clotted normally. So if they had just a little bit, she was taking samples of their livers actually while they were alive. So a little sample, and though it sounds terrible, she saved a lot of bobcats by doing this because now it's illegal in California. But she was able to prove that if they had a trace of it, it was affecting their immune systems. It was making their immune systems go haywire over some things and not respond properly to other things. So even these animals where we can't say, oh, he bled out, he might have died because of rodenticide, but it started this domino effect, which compromised his immune system, which made him more likely to get mange, which made him anorexic because he was too tired to hunt. So those things we can't even prove definitively here yet that these animals die from rodenticides. So, but all the proof that Cape Ann has taken is literally direct deaths where you can tell definitively it was rat poison. Next slide, please. Fisher. There is a Dr. Needle in New Hampshire. This is recent. He is doing research on the decline of the fisher in New England. And they just didn't know why their numbers were declining. And in the studies they're doing, they've actually been like, we think it's rat poison. A lot of them are testing positive for rat poison, which I find interesting because I received 2 juvenile fishers this year that were both had trouble with their blood clotting. This one is sedated. It survived. One of them we were able to save, one of them we weren't. But it was so sluggish, so weak. We did not think it was going to make it. And then when we drew the blood, we realized it was so delayed. And these guys are very efficient, wonderful hunters. It's sad because at the age, his mom was bringing it the food. Can you imagine feeding your kids and not realizing that you're killing them? Like how awful that must be. These birds of prey, there were 4 dead great horned owls that were found in Arlington. I believe it was Arlington, and they all died of rat poison. It was Arlington. They all had definitively proven they died from rat poison. I was like, oh my God, the parents, they didn't find dad. Their dad usually helps, but parents had no clue. No clue. Next. I'll be handing out Prozac after this. So, also, so they put them in these bait boxes, which Heather will talk to you more about, but they'll tell you that the bait boxes are fine because only the mice can get in and out. Your kids are safe, your cats are safe, but they don't factor in how the food chain works. So it doesn't matter. As long as it gets in the mouse and the mouse makes it out of that box, the rat poison has made it out of that box. The rat's just carrying it. And skunks get caught in those boxes all the time. I can't tell you how many times I have been sprayed because of rat poison. Just throwing that out there too. Those bait boxes, animals absolutely do get stuck in them. They're terrible. I don't like them at all. And the skunks not only will get poisoned from eating the mice and the rats directly, but they will also actually eat the bait directly. So that's terrible too. This, I did some numbers because I thought this was very interesting. When I'm talking to people, and you'll come across this too, you might have some people that just really aren't animal lovers and really don't care. They just want the mice and the rats dead. And even if that's their take on it, I still say the rat poison isn't their best way to go about it. Because when we actually quantify the amount of mice and rats that these animals eat, we are making a situation far worse when we kill them. This is how many these animals will eat in their lifetime. Okay? Look at the gray horned owl. I was just talking about how a family of 4 died in Arlington. Each in its lifetime will eat about 50,000 rodents. So we're talking about 200,000 rodents more in Arlington. Okay? Now, I didn't even go with the full spectrum of how long they can live. This is the average lifespan. So what would happen if you start killing the animals in your neighborhood? So let's say you've got 6 rats in your house and you want them out, which is completely understandable. You poison them, they're out. It works great. It works very fast. It's very efficient. But you just killed the neighborhood gray horned owl. So soon these mice and these rats will be back, right? If you don't close the areas that they're getting in, and we're killing all the animals that actually keep their numbers down. We're going to be so reliant on this poison because where Mother Nature was offering a free service before, the service isn't going to be offered. So keep that in mind too. Every hawk we've treated, every owl, like we're increasing the rodent population by getting rid of them. Next slide, please. I don't know why I threw this in here. You don't want to live with mice and rats. Oh, I know why. Every town that I've talked to a few towns about getting rid of it. And I recently went to Salem and they said they weren't overly interested in working with it. We've pushed them. They're a lot more interested in it now. But they were like, the rats and the mice are a problem, especially Salem, if you think about it, where mice and rats love food that's out in the open. I can't imagine Salem in Halloween. Those mice must be like, did I just die and go to heaven? There's like candy everywhere. So I was talking about exclusion, and exclusion is the first step in rodent control. And when I left the building, I walked by so many open dumpsters, so many open trash bins with bait boxes right beside them. And I'm like, what is the point? Close the lid. What good are you doing? They're going to keep coming back. Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, why not push more laws, regulations on closing lids of trash cans? Save us all a bunch of money and time. So when we leave trash around, that can really cause a problem. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but there's a lot of information out there about ways that you can limit how easy it is for rodents to access your home. And it is the first step. It is exclusion. And I tell people this, some people will be like, there's a raccoon in my attic, or there's a fox that keeps getting to my chickens. And I'm like, okay, make your chicken coop, not just so the chickens can't get out, but so the fox can't get in, okay? If there's a raccoon in your attic, there must be a big hole in your attic somewhere, because they're not even all that small. So you can try to kill every fox in the neighborhood or every raccoon that comes, and believe me, more will come. Because if your home is a perfect place for that raccoon, once it's gone, more will find that spot. More foxes will find those chickens. So with your home, you can use all the poison in the world, but if you don't seal up some openings and entrances and ways that they're getting in, more will come. More will come. You're going to make those pesticide companies richer and richer. Next slide, please, darling. Don't use glue traps, guys. These are the worst. This is a red squirrel. They catch all kinds of things. Birds of prey, too, have been caught in these things. They not only that, even for the mice and the rats, it's a very slow death. It's very terrible, very painful. You can change that slide. I did save this one. There's a picture of him afterwards. He lost a lot of fur on his tail. It took a while to grow back. And that is also a real pain to pull him out of those things. It takes forever. You have to use a lot of flour, but please don't use, while we're talking about stuff you shouldn't use, the glue traps are absolutely the worst. Next slide. Banner Pest Control is in this area, and we love him. He is the main pest control company for Lowell, actually. And Lowell just banned the SGARs, second generation anticoagulant rodenticides. So on municipal property, true. So people can still use it on their private property. Banner does all the municipal properties. I can't say that word. Say that 3 times fast. But Banner has been working on using different methods, a combination of exclusion, traps, contraceptives, and a different type of poison that's not as deadly, like it's like a last resort, but he also has ways of like making sure that the rats don't get out of the house if they are poisoned. It's a whole other conversation, but if you are interested, if you have an issue with mice or rats and you want to have a pest control company that is dedicated to not using these SGARs, Rick is the guy to call. He's absolutely amazing. Next slide. This is a picture of the two males that I told you. Yeah, we let their dad go like within a few days, but the boys had to stay with us through the winter because they came in right as it was getting really cold out. So they had to stay inside until it was warm enough. And then in the spring, we released them. So they were gorgeous when they left. So We're going to keep fighting the good fight, trying to take care of these animals and save the ones that we can. But meetings like this are so important, and the advocacy is so important. More and more towns are banning them. And yes, it's only on municipal properties, but guys, these municipal properties are schools, big, large buildings. And every town that says, I don't want it. Wow, did that just get super bright? Every town that says they don't want it makes a statement. We have, how many towns now, Heather? 8?
68.
68?
Wait, what is the question?
How many towns have banned it on municipal properties? Okay. Okay.
Some haven't banned it, like Austin, talk about municipal property except for Stewart. But I'm giving it a
Gotcha.
try.
Okay, right. So that, but enough towns and cities have banned it to where it's making a statement to legislators and things like that. So the more towns and cities that do it, the bigger a statement that it makes. So it's so important for people to advocate. That's awesome. That's awesome. That's awesome. And anyway, but that wraps up what I have to say. And what'd you say? Okay, yeah. So Heather Packard's going to come up. Heather works with Mass Autobahn and has been doing these sorts of talks to help explain to people what you can do, how you can advocate for these animals, and what we can do to make a difference. Absolutely. Do you want me to be your slide person? Wow, that is a good shot.
Yeah, that was not my opinion. Not about.
Not a photographer like Derek. Yeah. All right. So wonderful intro stories, and we learned a lot about the harms of firsthand about the harms of rodent poisons. So I'm going to kind of zip through that, but we will talk about what are the alternatives in a little bit more detail, because you cannot talk to anyone about getting rid of these rodent poisons without them immediately wanting information on what to do instead, right? So we try to help make sure everyone feels like they have some information about that. And then Mass Audubon has a Rescue Raptor advocacy campaign. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we're doing and how to get involved. I'll be handing it back to Derek because we're launching right here in Chelmsford. So we're going to try and ban it on municipal property, maybe on private property, like organizing community outreach. So Derek will be telling you all about it. All right. So the problem is as Jane has already said, is we have heavily over-relied for a decade or more on those second generation anticoagulant rodenticides, which the acronym is SGARs. So SGARs are the problem. You're going to hear us say the word SGAR sometimes when you're in this work. That's an acronym to become familiar with, all right? And basically a pest control company gets called, whether it's for municipal or property or a business or home, and they come and they put out the poisons. They don't really worry about anything else. The vast majority of pest control is done with this poison. Like I'm talking over 90%, if not more, all right? The boxes look like this, and there's a hole in the end for the rodent to get in. This has never had poison in it. You can buy these just anywhere online. They sell them. They also sell the poisons. I did not buy poison. This is construction paper, but yeah. My kiddo helped make little fake ones, but they, you saw in pictures, but they put it on these little posts and then the rodent comes in. Now rodents are by nature, we all know with a squirrels are rodents, chipmunks are rodents. What do they do if they get their food? If they find an acorn from an oak tree, what's a squirrel going to do with it? Guess what? Rats and mice are also just like squirrels or chipmunks, they're rodents. They're hoarders. They like to take the food and run off. And so our pest control companies will tell you, oh, these are safe because they're child resistant, tamper proof. They clip shut. This little key, they call it, but it's just a little piece of plastic that unlocks it. It's supposed to keep it. And there was a ban done for retail sale in 2008. You know how they got that? Activism by volunteers just like you. Would not have happened if it weren't for people standing up and saying it's harming children. Over 10,000 children a year were being poisoned by rodenticides. And it still took years to convince our federal government to ban it, even though it was kids getting poisoned. So we've been fighting a good fight since then to get it just completely banned. California has managed to do it, but there's a loophole. You can still buy those poisons. Private property owners even can, anyone can on like Amazon. Online e-commerce was not banned. So you can't get it at Home Depot or Ace Hardware, but you can order it online. So like I could have ordered this box and ordered the poison to put in it and just had it in my backyard if I wanted to. All right. But truthfully, the vast majority of poison you find around, you'll see these boxes now that, and I'll warn you, when it's a sight once seen, you can't unsee. You want to flip to the next slide for me? Or maybe I can, we'll see. Oh, there we go. So that's what the boxes look like. And now that you've seen it, you're going to see them everywhere, all over in Chelmsford. If it's on municipal property in Chelmsford, it's outside this library. Like it's everywhere, okay? And you're definitely going to see it all over private property. I'm so sorry that I have just like afflicted you with this problem that I have now. I'm like horrified as you just go for a walk and you're like, oh, because it's just every time there's a trash can or anything, these black boxes are just everywhere. And you've never noticed them before. You just walk past them, but now you're going to be like, oh God. And you're thinking, which hawk or owl is about to go because of that box, right? Or pets. Pets are being poisoned because again, these boxes that the poison doesn't stay inside them, it gets out because the rodents will carry it out. And it's made out of plastic. So while it's called tamper resistant, they often get left sitting, they're outdoors for the most part. They get left out sometimes for years, I think. The pest control company is supposed to come back and service them and keep them in good condition every month. You know, that doesn't always happen. And we see them routinely busted. They're also often by dumpsters. So the big dump trucks are coming, right? They'll have overflowing dumpsters all around it. I took that picture at a grocery store in my town. Of the one there, big picture. And it was right, I should have taken a step back and had one because it was right by a completely overflowing dumpster. Well, you're never going to get rid of rodents if you keep not dealing with sanitation issues, like Jane said. So these black boxes are truly everywhere. They are required by law to be labeled if they're inside. Do not ask me why. They don't have to have labels. It's not required if they're outdoors. So I have seen some, there's a picture here. This is also from my town. I just went for a walk one day because before I ask volunteers to do stuff, I always like try and do it myself, right? So I was like, oh, well, let's go see what's going on in my town. And I was happily surprised that my town wasn't using SGARs on municipal property. I live in Concord. They were using Radex, which we'll talk about in a moment, which is much better. But I did find a ton of them on private property. So there's actually a home rule petition to restrict on private property that Save Concord Wildlife Volunteer Group is putting in for town meeting in June to try and restrict them on private property as well. And these would be gone if that happens. These 2 boxes would disappear. They wouldn't be there anymore. This was by a real estate company. But the good news is that this one, when it's not labeled, you don't know. And there is a slight chance that it is something else because there's a couple of other things that they'll use the same box for. They can use it for a snap trap. There is room in the center for a snap trap. So they'll do that sometimes. And then they also will put other types of poison that are less, can be less bioaccumulation is the big problem with SGARs because the rat eats it and then it doesn't break down in the rat system, right? The rat's body doesn't metabolize second generation SGAR. Those types of poisons just hang out, as Jane said, like months and months and months, right? So there are others though that are a little bit better because our body can, the animal's body, mammals can metabolize them. And so Radex is an example of that. So I'm going to show you, want to see if we can switch to the next slide myself. Yeah. So the solution is creating what's called integrated pest management plans. And that's IPM. So I told you the problem is SGARs. We like acronyms in this world. I don't know why, but these are 2 that I always teach people because You're going to hear them as you get involved in this work. The solution is IPM. And the challenge with this is it's a plan that addresses all levels of this pyramid. All right. And so often when you talk to people, they want a simple answer. They want to do a one-to-one swap. Okay. Oh, I'm killing owls, or your Labrador. So, great, I will get rid of that. That's terrible. And they want to just take this out and put something else in, one-to-one swap. It doesn't work like that. It's a plan, and you need to think through on your property how to exclude, let's not give them a home, how to starve them, let's not feed them. Once you've done the first two, if they don't have a home and they don't have any food, less to deal with at the target level. Not that you wouldn't have any, and certainly on bigger commercial properties or municipal properties, they're going to still need to target them, right? But it will be a lot less. And of course, like Jane said, don't forget, one of the best ways to target our animals are predators, right? That are natural and free. So making as much habitat-friendly environment for predators, which is not any place with SGARs. Every time I hear someone say they saw one of the ladies working on the art show was in here when I got here and said she'd seen a bald eagle in town, like fly over her property, like, I don't know, like 6 months ago. She remembered it. Yeah, and she was so like, wow, because she saw my picture of the bald eagle. So she was like, oh. And so here in Chelmsford, apparently you occasionally have bald eagles, which I know of only about 70 nesting pairs in Massachusetts, because they were already almost decimated by DDT like 50 years ago. And we had to work really hard to ban it with activism, and then eventually reintroduce them with human intervention to make it happen. It took like 30 years to get them off the endangered species list. We're up to about 70 nesting pairs, and we're killing them again. Bald eagles have died. There's a very well-known one called MK in Arlington that kind of was a keystone moment for the movement in Massachusetts that died in Mount Auburn Cemetery in Arlington in 2023. There are volunteers who've been working on this issue and activists for like a decade, but that really took it from like, I don't know, maybe a handful of people who really talked about this all the time and the wildlife rehabilitators who were dealing with it, to now hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of activists are organizing the state. So it's been a really critical shift since 2023 and kind of the number of people involved in this movement. So as you go through this, the last thing I'll just mention on this slide is the last resort products. So Mass Audubon. So if you're talking about IPM, it's a concept of managing pests. If you go to ag school, you're going to learn, if you go to ag college, about IPM. If you're managing crops, you have to manage pests. It's a concept people learn about. If you Google it, you'll see all kinds of information out there about integrated pest management. But this very specifically non-poison integrated pest management is what we're trying to focus on. And it's definitely just for rodents. And the last resort on a generic one for rodents, if you just look it up online, will indeed include SGARs in the red, all right? And so if someone tells you they're doing IPM, it doesn't mean that they're not using SGARs. You need to ask what they're doing, because it can fall in like a generic definition of IPM, of integrated pest management, as the point of it. The problem is, as I mentioned, our pest control companies are dropping down right to it. And that's all they're doing. They're not doing anything else. And it's a really healthy business model because they get to come back every month. They have a standing contract with every vendor. Anyone who calls them, they end up being, oh, that's a monthly bill now they get from that restaurant, that grocery store, that homeowner, that municipality. It's their bread and butter, because they get money every month by servicing those boxes. So what we recommend are two products: corn gluten meal. The actual brand name is Radex or Mousex. I mentioned Concord is using those on our municipal property. It coats the digestive. You probably know more about it than I do, but it coats the digestive. I do it without Jane Newhouse in the room. Usually I do the spiel, so I had to learn more. I'm a community organizer, not a wildlife vet or a rodent control expert, but I've learned a lot. So corn gluten meal coats their digestive systems, and rodents have rats and mice have a place in their digestive system that senses that they're thirsty. So when it gets coated, rodents can't vomit. It's just one of these weird things about rodents. So then they can't like clear that out when it's coated, and they never know they're thirsty and they die of dehydration. But no poison. It is corn gluten meal. So when that is, if there's a dead mouse or rat because of Rad-X and another animal would eat it, it's totally metabolized. It's corn gluten meal. It's not going to hurt any of these lovely animals, right? Or foxes or anything. So it is one of the best. I will say though, I have heard anecdotally, rats in particular, because rats are smarter and faster than mice by like a long shot, that rats won't always eat it. They don't think it's tasty. And it's because the brand name Rad-X and Mouse-X, that company has used as a like sales technique to say that the animal, the rodent will desiccate and not even smell. So it's smell-free rodent control. And the way they do that is by putting salt in it. They put a lot of salt in the product, and it will help like dry out the body after it stops drinking. So it just like desiccates and gets really thin and skinny and dried out. It doesn't smell right, except it doesn't taste good because it's too salty. And the rats, so I've heard people have to put peanut butter on the bait. It's supposed to be bait that's tasty. Like they design it to be bait, like yummy. But it isn't necessarily, at least for rats. I think they're more discerning than mice. The last one is kind of thin, but it's a very different one. And I never can pronounce it. Coliferol. Yeah, there you go. I'm glad it's not just me. I never try. Vitamin D3. So this one, though, I will say I have never talked to someone who's a veterinarian or a wildlife rehabber. I can ask, do you have an opinion about this? Yep. Oh, I should be using this here.
It does have the possibility of affecting animals in the food chain, but a lot less likely because they'll die sooner. The mice and the rats eat it. So especially if it's inside, they're more apt to die where they are. Yeah. But also it has a stop action, so they won't overeat it. They'll feel sick shortly after eating it, so they're less likely to gorge or anything like they will the SGARs.
That's good. So what I studied, when I looked it up online, well, first of all, it's vitamin D3. Like I take that. My doctor tells me to, but I'm clearly not taking it at the dosage that is this huge dose. And basically it causes your body to release a bunch of calcium into your bloodstream with a rodent to do that. And then that overload of calcium affects muscles, including your heart muscles. And so they will die of heart failure because it's this massive for them. The problem with this one, that the reason the vets don't like it is that it doesn't have the vitamin K antidote that SGARs have. So if it doesn't cause like a lot of secondary poisoning, like where another animal were to eat that dead rodent, they're not really going to like die of the vitamin D overload because our bodies can metabolize it, right? But it is extremely lethal if ingested directly. So it doesn't cause secondary poisoning, but if that bite box that they put it in is busted open or not sealed properly, then if a dog or something, because it is bait, remember all this stuff is meant to, your dog will love to eat that SGAR. It also will love to eat this vitamin D3. And so if it can get to it directly, there's no antidote. But every vet I've ever asked, if I said, push come to shove and you're talking to someone, a municipality, some big commercial business, and they will not use any other of the like snap traps or the options. If you had to do SGARs or this, which would you do? And they say vitamin D3. But indoors, short-term and carefully monitored is what we recommend. Mass Audubon has used it. So that's why it's on our Mass Audubon chart. We have 21 nature centers across the state. We never use it ever. We had in summer 2023, there was a rat infestation in Broadmeadow Brooks Nature Center in Worcester, downtown Worcester. I don't know if any of you've ever been to it. It's one of my favorite nature centers. If you haven't been, love it. And, but yeah, I mean, we all have this real visceral reaction to rats, and so they had rats running around in their nature center where all the kids are, and then drop in visits. People never even heard of Mass Audubon, and then there'd be like, the rats outside. So they were like, no, we got to get rid of the rats, right? And so the good news is I went and met with them. This had happened like 6 months early when I went and met with the facility staff, and I'm like, so curious, like, what did you do? I was actually excited when I found out they had an infestation, which is so bizarre because I wanted to know. I needed to hear from people whose boots are on the ground. How are you actually doing this? And they literally started, and without having been trained on this pyramid, they did it, which I was like, yeah. So they figured out how it was getting in. There was like this hole, kind of side next to a big door that they had downstairs where they brought in the lawnmowers and parked them indoors. It kind of chewed through a thin layer of like wood right there, and there was a hole. So, and when I went, it was all cleaned up and boarded up. They had they'd done exclusion like they're supposed to. Then they were like, okay, what are they eating? Well, it's Mass Audubon. So they feed the birds and bird feeders. We love our birds in Mass Audubon. And so they had bird feeders, but the volunteers were like dribbling some on the floor inside the nature center where they had metal trash cans. They were keeping it in. So that was good, but they weren't always being neat about it. So they got a shop vac and they trained the volunteers and they kept a shop vac plugged in right next to it and had them vacuuming it up every time. They also stopped feeding the birds for like 6 months though, to just like, okay, we can't do this for a while, and took the birdseed out of the building and just like to get rid of the rats initially. But they're back. The bird feeders are back. If you go to Broad Meadow Brook, you'll see them. They're back, but they're shop vacuuming regularly now. So then they still had some. So you can go to the next slide. So they had done their exclusion work, and you already saw this lovely, we both have the same one. No, it's awesome. So Raptors of the Solution is this fabulous organization in California that helped get the California ban. And this is all free outreach materials on their website. They have tons of free outreach materials. So no one needs to recreate these wonderful resources. We just borrow them all the time from Raptors of the Solution. So we're sealing it. In Mass Audubon, we actually monitor rodent activity with a type of bait that makes their droppings glow so that we know where the hot spots are in bigger properties. I always cracks me up too to think of the pest control company coming back with a black light looking for mouse poop. But that's what they need to do. When you have a big property, again, if it's just your house, you might not need to, but to be able to do targeted exclusion, I hear rats can get through a hole the size of a quarter and mice the size of a dime. So exclusion is hard, especially the bigger you're building, the older you're building, the more buildings you have, like our Drumlin farm that uses this has many different buildings. We have livestock feed, we have kids with their lunch trash for camp and everything, So we're always going to be managing rodents, all right? They're not going to go extinct here. The goal is to manage them and keep the populations down. So by knowing where the hotspot is, we know where to focus our exclusion work, like, oh, it's that corner, how are they getting in, right? And we also know where to put our snap traps to put out, to check them regularly for a while. All right, so let's go to the next slide. Starving them. So having rodent-proof trash cans is a huge issue. So you first have to have a trash can. In Boston, they don't even use them. They just put their trash, a lot of residents in Boston set their trash bag out of the curb. So has had an expert come in from New York City who's like a rodent PhD or something. I forget what his title is exactly, but he has a PhD and was a consultant for a whole year. And they did all these neighborhood visits and they wrote a Boston rat action plan. It came out last summer. And immediately afterward, the assistant commissioner to facilities, John Ulrich in Boston, pulled all SGARs off of municipal property in Boston. He was an ally, I think, for a long time and just couldn't do it. And so as soon as he kind of had the authority to do so, he's a birder. He was like, all right, these are gone. The only place that last I heard, I haven't I haven't checked back with him since last fall, but he couldn't get rid of them in sewers. Because some of the solutions he was using didn't work in a sewer type situation, which I'll talk about in a moment. But still, that's a huge win. Like we were so excited. But the big thing that Foster Action Plan said was SGARs have been proven through studies to be 100% ineffective if you don't do sanitation. 100% ineffective if you don't deal with sanitation. So rodent-proof trash cans, my town Concord just issued these like 2 months ago. I was like, oh my gosh. They don't know I'm doing this plan, but I was like, yay, look at Concord. So they're made out of that same heavy plastic. Now, if you don't reissue these periodically, rodents will still chew through that. So who was I just talking to? Someone, I think it was Somerville? Brookline. Brookline had these issued like 5-6 years ago, and now they have, literally the person talking to me said, mine already has a hole in it. So rats are persistent, so you have to think, think through how to keep them out of your trash. These big belly trash cans are, I know they've been really advocating for these in Waltham because they're metal. And so on the city streets, if you've ever been to Waltham for lunch, they have like and dinner, they have these great restaurants on Moody Street. All up and down Moody Street, they have open, like the umbrella trash cans are just open on the sides. They just have the little lid, like they're a mushroom cap lid. So it's just a smorgasbord for rodents all night long or all day long if they're brazen. And so this, they can pull down it's just like a mailbox. You pull open it, you put your trash in, you let go, and it closes automatically. And they're metal. So big belly trash cans is something you could advocate for in your town. I don't know if you guys do community gardens or anyone has their own backyard gardens, but addressing compost, having a closed composting system is really great if you can. Rodents don't like spicy things. So remember, the point of IPM is to try and make your home or your space less attractive to rodents. It isn't, and so anything you can do to just make them want to keep walking on by and live in nature. Mice just go out and live in the woods, right? And so they plant peppermint a lot of times around their garden because it just makes it not smell. It stinks to them. They're like, ew, and just keep moving. Pick up your drops. If you don't leave rotting tomatoes or things on the ground, be really vigilant. And if you have your own garden, to pick up drops. If you have livestock, don't do continued feed, like feed at 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. But don't just leave chicken feed out all day, 24/7, right? Like have feeding times. That's one of the ways you can handle it. Bird feeders. That's Audubon. We love our birds so much. So you really, if you have a standard everyday bird feeder and you haven't done anything to rodent proof it, and that means squirrel proofing too, by the way, all these techniques work for squirrels, which is good because we all know, we see those by day. The problem is you don't realize you are feeding birds all day, and you truly are, and I'm so sad to tell you this bad news, feeding rodents all night. So the mice are getting in there, or rats, depending where you live, or both. It is the sad fact. So trying to keep drops off the ground because the first place the rodent walks by is on the ground. So you can do these little catchers. You can buy them. They attach to the bottom to try and keep it up. You can use already pre-hauled bird seed. It costs a little more, but then they actually market it as like no mess bird seed because the birds don't have to haul it, so they don't drop less. So it makes less mess on the ground. You also, though, would attract a more variety of birds because unhauled bird seed, certain birds can only haul certain types of seeds, but if it's all unhauled, you can get a more diverse birds at your bird feeder. If you're a birder, you might like that. You can put it on a pulley. I went to Natural History Museum of Cape Cod, and they had a whole row of them all on these pulleys, which I thought was really cool. So that would help keep your rodents off of it. You can just plant rodent-friendly habitat rodent. Oh my gosh, take that back. Bird-friendly habitat in your yard or even on your deck. And so Mass Audubon, all the Audubons, if you wanted to find out, there's like every Audubon site I ever went to has whole pages dedicated to this in creating bird habitat. And you can do it on your patio or your balcony if you are a renter. You can do it in your backyard if you're a homeowner. But then you don't have to have bird feeders and all, and can still have lots of birds. Try to think of, it's so sad though for us. Or the other thing you do is you have children, you can make them bring the bird feeder in every night. I've had people tell me that's like their teenagers' regular responsibilities. Every night they bring the bird feeder in because that's a guaranteed way not to be feeding them, right? And then they go back and hang their bird feeder again in the morning. All right, next. So targeting, we have snap traps. Rats will actually grab the food and run off. Remember, they're really smart and fast. So you have to have like a little tool to help force them to go straight. This is actually gadget in the top corner. That's Bob Linscott's hand, who runs. He's another one like Vanderpass that I promote because he's dedicated, no SGARs ever. But any kind of gadget. Then a lot of these are kind of DIY, do-it-yourself home ones. But you can try and keep a rat needs to go into it straight, or a snap trap for a rat won't work very well. Mice, it works great. They're not as smart or as quick, but snap traps don't work really well for rats unless you have something like this. But snap traps, and then one below it is electronic traps. which basically with that one, the rodent seals there's electricity, like a battery in it. And they seal their feet when they go in to eat the bait, because they are baited. You bait them with like peanut butter on a cracker or whatever, but their feet then will close the circuit and they're electrocuted. But snap traps and electronic traps are not really reasonable for large commercial or municipal solutions. Usually, like sometimes Sylvester has convinced some places to use snap traps. She's one of our advocates I've worked with, and she's fabulous. And some big commercial properties have switched to snap traps, but I think it's hard. I think it's a hard sell because they have to, you're fighting rats, one rat at a time. You have to remove the carcass, right? You have to have someone come for either of those. So to me, we use them a lot in Mass Audubon sanctuaries. So any smaller facility or homeowners, those are great. But like when you're talking to someone who's really managing the mall at Whitney Field or some big thing, I don't know, it's going to be an uphill sell because it's going to cost a lot more for just the cost of labor. They're looking at their budget, and have someone come back regularly to service a snap trap or an electronic trap is much more frequent than it would have been the once a month for the SGAR box, right? So they're like, wow, but it's going to cost a lot more. So it's a harder sell. The bottom two are much more commonly used now by our municipal, like in Boston or Lowell and the bigger municipalities. Rodent contraceptives, Newton, Mass has not had SGARs on municipal property for a decade. Josh Morse is their facilities director. He got the job a decade ago and just was like, what are we doing? And just pulled them. He's like the longest term town I know in Massachusetts. So I always turn to him when I have questions because I just feel like he always has some idea about it because he's been doing it for 10 years, right? So he leaned in really hard on rodent contraceptives. About 2 years ago, this came out, kind of a new thing. ContraPest came out initially with a liquid version. Brookline tried it and told me there were efficacy issues. And I was like, what does that mean? Sounds so fancy. It froze. Oh, right. In Massachusetts and New England, a liquid. And they basically had it like I was like so fascinated by this concept. I'm like, little teeny birth control pills. It's not. It is a product that they put in, initially it was in liquid, and now they're putting it in what they call pellets. But basically, it's both male and female contraceptive that makes them infertile for 45 days. So they would have to service it. So I'm like, this is a great opportunity to switch for our pest control companies to a better wildlife safe business model. They still have to service it, right? So they're still going to get their money. So I like this one a lot. And a lot of municipalities are using it. Boston has been doing a pilot program. They use the one that looks like actual pellets called Good Bites. In Jamaica Plains, they did a pilot from August of 2022 to August of 2023 through last summer, 2024. Last fall, I went to the Boston City Council hearing to hear the results of it. When I went, it turns out it wasn't all of Jamaica Plain, it was 31 houses. So they had some efficacy issues, they said again, because it's an open environment where like some rodents that were fertile were coming in and vice versa, going in and out. With only 31 houses, they had some mixed results, but it was good enough. They decided to expand it, and I haven't heard the next step of that, what they're doing. There's some really exciting stuff going on with this. The ContraPest company, when they found out it was freezing, created their pellet, which looks like little sausages to me, but it's the guy with the blue glove. They call it Evolve. So anyway, really interesting, very new, 2 years old. I think there's going to be, there's getting more and more demand for it. So I suspect we'll see lots of other competitors and new products coming on the market in the future. But cities and towns are very interested in this. And Newton, he's like so excited about it because he's like, if I can just have less, like the speed with which rodents reproduce, it's so hard to get ahead when you're doing, IPM with exclusion, sanitation, and targeting. He's like, we can just have less of them. Yay. So he's very excited and has tons of contraceptives in Newton. The last one is very commonly used in the cities. So it's carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide sprayers. Well, we all know this is the one why they haven't gotten rid of SGARs in Boston in the sewers, because this is the one most of the big cities are using. And you clearly can't spray carbon monoxide or carbon dioxide and fill the sewers. But it is extremely effective when they put it in their burrow. So rats burrow underground. That's why they love those tunnels you saw for the snap traps. They like to live in tunnels, and they live underground, and they have a hole about the size of a tennis ball. Now that could be other animals too, but if they're really small, they're probably not rats in your yard. If it's the size of a tennis ball, it might be, and you'd have to think like, where's the source of food? Are you living right next to a restaurant that has a dumpster out back or something? Like those might be rat burrows in your yard if you have those, especially if you've seen any. So what do? Well, the best thing to do is a CO2 spray. You get a pest control company to come out and they just pump CO2 down in those, fill it with the gas. The rats suffocate underground. They're already buried. They get, hundreds of them at once, possibly in their whole burrow. And so that's why the cities love this, right? It's just like so quick, so efficient. It's not one rat at a time like the way a snap trap would be, right? It's the whole burrow. So they've really leaned into this one, and New York City's using it too. Lots of the cities are going for these sprayers. The top one is the CO2, because CO2, I was like, Mass Audubon is all organizing on many other issues related to climate change. And here I am like advocating for releasing CO2, but it is, it's a relatively very small amount to kill these rodents. So that's a motor. Motors release CO2. So the one with the black coil, they just put that into the burrow. The bottom one is a tank of carbon monoxide. They're very strict regs, though, about how close to buildings or houses you can be to do that one. And then the last thing I'll mention is the dry ice is just frozen CO2. And that's actually something I've heard homeowners use if they have like backyard chickens. I've had people contact me even. I'm like, try dry ice. Like, you can ask your pest control company to do it. He'll charge more and call it rat ice. But you can use the same dry ice you'd use it with your like community theater to like create ambiance of some sort, right? But be careful with handling. I always tell them there's lots of risks with it. If you're not careful, you can't touch it and everything. And you don't want that gas in your house or car. But basically, they do the same thing. They just put it down the burrow hole and they wad up a piece of newspaper and stick it on top. So as it evaporates, it goes down and the gas fills the burrow. So it does the same. And we also say don't use glue traps. I know I just told you how to kill rats a million different ways, but we don't want to torture them. All right, and that's what glue traps do. All right, next slide. So Mass Audubon has a program. We're offering advice support. We're trying to go all across the state and do this. You can go to the next slide. I do all kinds of things. I have a monthly meeting for leaders all across the state. I do orientations. I do this exact slideshow for free on Mass Audubon's program catalog. It's a free program, which not all of our programs are, so it's quite popular. I do it every month. I have a toolkit with all kinds of resources. I do kickoff events like this one, and I manage the IT. Hopefully that's working. And I help support volunteers continuously as they go through their campaigns. I'll be talking more about what this is, but there's a home rule petition strategy that we're working on. And then I support them with that. And we have a team tracker, which is like a spreadsheet that lists every single town in Massachusetts and tells you which towns are organizing. If you want to go to the next slide, I think it's the map. There are currently 68 communities in Massachusetts who are organizing. Some are just forming, others are completely launched and independent. A few have expressed some interest, and there's others who attended some meetings, but I haven't really had a volunteer with the time and energy like Derek call kickoff and like get something going in their town. It is, if you've seen this map a year ago, it looked totally different, right? Like, it is amazing how quickly suddenly this movement is really growing. I got a call out of the blue a few weeks ago from Packard. I didn't know anyone was doing anything there. And it was a select board member telling me he'd heard about panic gas and thought he should let me know that they passed a ban on municipal property for it. Yay! No, like, they were, I had no clue. I had no volunteers in there. That, so it officially is a movement that's beyond my ability to put my arms around it, which is exactly what we want in Massachusetts. So it's so exciting that Chelmsford is launching. The next slide. We have lots of resources to support with all three of these activities. So we want to educate people. Every person who knows not to use it is one less family of owls that might die from property, right? It also might get someone to join this group or get involved and become a volunteer. We advocate for two types of local regulations because there is a statewide bill that says cities and towns do not have the authority to regulate rodenticides on private property. So Chelmsford cannot ban rodenticides on private property, all right? No city and town in Massachusetts can. They can ban it on municipal, on city or town property, like Lowell on February 4th. And there was some wonderful testimony that was done to get to me, and a year of advocacy. It was 3 volunteers primarily that made it happen. Really, they did tabling at community events every time, and they eventually bumped into some city councilors and created an ally out of one of them who filed a motion, and they banned it on city property in Lowell. So you can ban them on city, and then what you can do for private is kind of linked to the last one. So legislation, there is a statewide bill to ban rodenticides in the whole state, which is the big win we want. It just got filed in January by Rep. Hawkins from Attleboro and Senator from Worcester. We're so happy that they did it. And so we are doing lots of organizing. You might, if you sign up, you'll get emails from me periodically to say, now's the moment on this, the bill, it is a bill. It'll go through this 18-month process on how a bill becomes a law. And there'll be moments, key moments where like advocacy is needed to push our legislators to vote for it, right? So currently it's to ask them to co-sponsor it. Every legislator should be co-sponsoring it. And I should have looked up on my co-sponsor tracker before I came to know if Chelmsford's had. I don't. You guys have Senator Tar here, maybe? I don't know who your senator is, but anyway, what? Barrett. So Barrett hadn't last I looked. Barrett's mine too. Yeah. And yes, we'll cover everything. Yeah. So we want people to advocate directly with their legislators on that. The other thing, though, that is kind of a strategy on the state legislation is to pass this thing called a home rule petition. And that's at the town level. And basically, towns and cities have done it. They're asking for local control to restrict the authority to restrict SGARs on private property. They're asking for an exemption to state law. And a home rule petition is a tool that exists in our state that your local, like municipal public officials, you have a select board here, your town, right? Your town, your select board, and all of them will be very familiar with what a home rule petition is. They use it all the time for all kinds of different things, completely unrelated to this. They're very familiar with what a home rule petition is. And your state legislators are too, because a home rule petition is filed at the state legislature level as a bill. And every town that passes one, it's another bill on the same topic. And it means our state legislature, who are required by law to act on that bill, they cannot ignore it. So if Chelmsford asks for a home rule petition, they petition the state legislature for home rule on restricting on private property. It gives you the authority to do so if it were to pass. Then that bill is a separate bill than the one that's already filed. There's 6 filed, like Arlington, Newton, Newberry, like there's already 6. I know of another 6 towns that are currently have them on there as an article on the warrant for the upcoming town meeting, this spring town meeting season of like March through June. Towns tend to have a spring town meeting. So I'm hoping to have 10 to 12 by summer. And every one of those is going to have to go to the Joint Committee on Environment and Natural Resources. Those legislators are going to have a hearing, and all us rodenticide advocates are going to come in and they're going to be like, oh, there they are again. And they're going to hear it over and over, and they're going to see towns all across the state from east to west and out to the Cape showing this groundswell of support. And they have an easy solution. And we've seen it work on other issues, by the way, like climate issues and other things. When lots of home rule petitions get filed on the same issue by many towns, it isn't necessarily about getting Chelmsford's bill through. It's about pushing those legislators, kind of even annoying them, so that they will just vote on the statewide ban. We have it on a silver platter, a statewide solution for them. They don't even have to design a statewide solution. We already got it filed. So it's a tactic to push on the statewide bill in many ways, although obviously if you did get it, yay, if Chelmsford restricted on private property. Last year, the end of the legislative session was in July, and we just started a new one this January. But the last time there were fewer cities that had it filed, but we were very pleasantly surprised, but surprised nonetheless, that both Newton and Arlington's got out of committee, and were literally, one was going to the House and the floor of the House, and one was going to the floor of the Senate for a vote. We were like, are these really going to pass? But they didn't. So anyway, we're really hopeful that you can participate in any way here in Chelmsford. You can, I think this is maybe my last slide or very close to it. There's a toolkit with resources for all those things. We can keep moving. I'll be sharing a link to it and I'll give it to Derek to share in a follow-up email. Everything I just talked about is in this toolkit. All in one place. Yep. So now I'm going to hand it off to you. Oh, and I'm going to do this. Here you go. All right.
Yeah, so if anybody's interested in joining to kind of push this through, March 16th, like 6:30, shoot over there, email like, right now here, obviously, and just kind of figure it out from there.